Hi guys, welcome to a new episode of Geopolitics with Abu. Today I have a guest called Yusuf Gupa. Yusuf is a consultant with expertise on political monitoring, intelligence analysis, and strategic advisory. He has worked with prestigious organizations like Bulwark, Steers Insight to provide insight to help them with decision making. He's my former colleague at Bulwark Intelligence. Yusuf, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me today, Abu.
First of all, I want to talk about Steers Insight. Recently, no, not recently, like a while ago, the renowned tennis international Serena Williams, she bought shares in it, and I think it's a testament to the work that you and your colleague did there while you were there. So maybe you should talk more of your, give us an overview of your work at Steers Insights.
Okay. So Stairs is basically a data insights company, and it was famous for its Stairs Elections project, which I was a part of. In the Stairs Elections project, Stairs provided data-driven live coverage of Nigeria's 2023 election to over 1 million viewers, and it received commendation for keeping Nigerians abreast of election incidents as they happen and also enhancing electoral transparency.
That's nice. So if you want anything political monitoring, strategic advisory, Yusuf is your guy. Okay, guys. So we are talking. Well, today this for episode 2. We are assessing the election, the second time election of Donald Trump, and how it will impact our very own continent, Africa. Donald Trump won the US election recently, and is going to be inaugurated in January 2025. Yusuf, you wrote an article. In that article, you gave insights on how how the second coming of Donald Trump, his re-election, will impact Nigeria. So, give us an overview of that article.
Okay. So a few weeks ago, I wrote an article titled How the Trump Presidency Will Affect Nigeria. And just to give our listeners a snapshot of it, I dissected the key features of Trump's foreign policy and key issues that would matter in Nigeria's engagements with the USA under the Donald Trump presidency. As regards to his foreign policy, I mentioned that Trump's foreign policy has two key features. It's isolationist and it's transactional. In terms of it being isolationist, Donald Trump is somebody who does not believe in the promotion of democracy across the world. He doesn't believe in any crusade of democracy. He also believes in the restriction of immigration. In addition to that, Donald Trump is someone who has a distaste for foreign engagement. So a typical example here is we will see the US pulling out of certain agreements and also cutting funding to certain international institutions. Now, in terms of Trump's foreign policy being transactional, this is the interesting part. Foreign policy is inherently transactional. It has an undercurrent of being quid pro quo. But the difference between Trump and the US political establishment is that for a lot of US politicians, be they Republican or Democrat, they are willing to trade resources for the global dominance of the USA. But for Donald Trump, he interprets global dominance in monetary terms. And that is why earlier on in his first term as president, he sold Super Tucano jets to Nigeria. It was a pragmatic decision that was hinged on the monetary benefit the US was going to take from it. His predecessor, Barack Obama, avoided the sale of those weapons for certain human rights reasons. Other issues in my article include immigration. Immigration is a key issue of concern. Trump, as we all know, is very militant when it comes to immigration. In his first tenure, there was a travel ban and a visa ban. And in his second coming, it's likely even going to be worse because he has vowed to increase the deportation, end birthright citizenship, and also reduce legal and illegal migration. And I think lastly, one key feature is climate change. Trump is someone who denies the science of climate change. In fact, he's pejoratively described as a climate change denier. In his first tenure, he pulled the US out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. President Joe Biden put the US back into the agreement, and it's highly likely that Trump is going to pull the US back out of the agreement again. Now, for Nigeria, this presents two issues. On one hand, it eases pressure off our oil and gas industry. But on the other hand, it also denies us access to certain finances for climate change. So this basically is the key thrust of my article.
Thank you very much. I want to take you like I want to give you another insight to how the US engages African countries and to provide another angle here. When you talk about African countries, especially the West African countries, and I will talk about the Sahel too. And because of you, we spoke about your article in Nigeria, about your how Nigeria will be impacted by Donald Trump's second time. It's just a general overview because of the geographical position of West Africa. The coastal West African countries are located in the Gulf of Guinea. The Gulf of Guinea itself is part of the Atlantic Ocean. It is a geopolitical imperative for the US to continue to maintain naval control of the Atlantic Ocean because doing so will allow them to make sure that hostile navies don't encroach on their territory. So let's say, for example, if Russia if Russia signs an agreement with Nigeria to establish a naval base in our Atlantic Ocean coast, let's say in Lagos, that will potentially give Russia ability to one day monitor naval activities close to the US borders, and the US cannot have that. That goes to that affects their security posture too in the Atlantic Ocean. So, do you think, considering how the second scramble for Africa is currently going, so do you think that the US consider this in their engagement with West African countries?
Oh, yes, I believe that they do. And as we know, in West Africa and the Sahel particularly, there's a strategic realignment going on. And unfortunately for the West and the USA, they're on the back foot.
Yes.
And President Donald Trump is a very competitive man. So what this means is that he's not going to yield the space to neither Russia or China. And so from this, we can predict an increased power competition in this space. That's one. Secondly, I believe that there's hardly one prediction that one can make in terms of saying how Trump's engagement is going to be in the Sahel. What one can do is give a range of scenarios. And the reason for saying this is because in Trump's first tenure, despite espousing isolationist rhetoric and saying that he's not in support of the US increasing footprint, he sponsored the building of the US drone base in Agadez, Niger Republic. So we can see a mismatch between words and action. And that's why I believe that one can hardly predict it. Trump is an unpredictable figure. Analysts describe him as mercurial and being a wild card. So therefore, what we can do is present a range of scenarios. And so for the Sahel, I think that there are three options that on the tables for Trump. One is Trump could mirror the approach of Russia and attempt to greenlight private mercenaries like Blackwater to operate in this space, underscoring a mercenary-led approach. Secondly, he could jettison whatever hindrances or restrictions that exist that prohibit the US from relating with these military regimes as a way to make sure that the US doesn't lose completely in this scramble for Africa. And thirdly is the opposite of this, which is inherently transactional. He can cut off all forms of military aid and economic assistance to these countries, underscoring that if you act against our interest and do not support us, there is no need to the US giving you anything in particular.
This is a very, very important question, very, very important topic, sorry, because it underscores a lot of things that is currently going on, the shift which you've identified that is going on in the Sahel. A lot of analysts have said that while the US is busy shooting down terrorists in the Sahara, China is, increasing its footprint in the economical front, building important infrastructures, and also extracting critical minerals, reinforcing their dominance in the global semiconductor industry. Let me give you an example. Recently, after ECOWAS imposed sea, air, and land blockade on Niger following the last coup which took place in the country. There was a standoff between Benin Republic and Niger. If you look at the geography, Niger is a landlocked country and rely on Benin to bring its goods from the sea. So after this imposition, there was a blockade and it led to deteriorating relationship between Benin Republic and Niger. And China stepped in because of the economic relationship it had with both countries, stepped in and negotiated a reasonable solution and allowed ports to be opened for Niger Republic to bring their goods from the sea and bring goods and take goods out. So do you still do you also feel like the US need to engage more on the economic front in this country and just not focus on just this security, the what they call it, the immigration part that is driving this conflict and the security aspect alone?
Yes, absolutely, I agree with you. And in fact, not only me, I recall that Vice President-elect J.D. Vance during the election, he critiqued the U.S. foreign policy as being focused on lecturing and moralizing, and commended China for an infrastructural-led foreign policy. So what this signifies is a potential shift in foreign policy. And I think it would benefit African countries to recognize that a US foreign policy that does not expect Africa to take ideological sides with either the East or the West and competes with China through value proposition in terms of competitive finance for infrastructural projects, as opposed to amplifying propaganda about debt trap diplomacy. That kind of foreign policy gives Africa the opportunity to relate with the outside world and several international partners without any feeling or inhibitions about saying we need to support ideologically, we need to support them ideologically. A business-led approach to foreign policy is what will benefit Africa.
Oh yes, let's talk about that, because when we talk about the business-led approach, is for Africa, and it's all about the resources. And this takes me to Central Africa, which Joe Biden recently visited Angola to tout the Lobito project. Lobito project is basically a 2 billion railway project financed by the US and European Union. It connects the copper from Zambia and DRC, copper belt from Zambia and DRC to Angola for Angola in the Indian Ocean to onward shipping towards the US via the Atlantic Ocean route. And then so like he went to Angola recently, as part of his farewell programs to tout the project and all that. And China responded immediately by revitalizing the Zambia Tanzania old railway that was established in 1976. So how do you feel like this, especially the countries in Central Africa, which that has high deposit of these mineral resources? The project itself was meant to challenge China's dominance and reinforce shaky global supply chains. So, how do you feel like Donald Trump's engagement with particularly these Central African countries will play out in this second term?
I think this is an important question because these countries that you have mentioned, DRC, Zambia, and Angola,
Tanzania,
they have immense mineral resource deposits. And the key problem with the Lobito corridor is that it is an extractive infrastructural project. So basically, it is a 1,300 kilometer railway that runs across these countries and extracts critical mineral resources from these countries to the port of Angola to be shipped to the USA and the EU. So there's no value addition. And what it does is it maintains Africa's position at the bottom of the mineral resources value chain.
Yeah.
And this is a problem for us. Yeah. On the other hand, the US is playing a loser's game, and the reason I'm saying this is because China had written these agreements at least a decade ago. They foresaw that the mineral resources in these countries will be integral to the infrastructure, to the development of technology. And for the USA, the reason why these resources are important is because of semiconductor chips and also the electronic vehicle batteries. These are technologies that China has pioneered and witnessed significant progress. And in fact, we also have US companies buying shares in Chinese companies to have a glimpse of this technology.
And to put this in perspective, recently, China, there was a tit for tat economic sanction between China and US regarding this semiconductor industry, whereby the US, through its Taiwanese affiliates, ordered them to suspend some shippings of some of these semiconductors like copper belt and cobalt to China, and China retaliated by restricting exports of some of these mineral resources to US. So in this tit for tat, in this global competition, economic competition renewed between China and US, Africa will definitely a role in this. And then when you look at it, there are different stages to the value chain of semiconductors. There, Africa is stuck at the extraction stage, and there are other stages which include the design, the manufacturing, the packaging, and testing. So I think it has to do with, from in my own end, to political will
Yes,
from
absolutely.
these countries, to move from being at the extractive stage to the designing and manufacturing, and then to from manufacturing to testing, and then
Yes.
to packaging, and then it will also improve African standing and the economy of us and the currency of African countries in the international market.
I absolutely agree with you because, as you've said, we cannot maintain our position in the extraction part of this value chain. It's very important that we move up that ladder. Africa has indeed come of age. And for these countries, the political leadership needs to understand that they would not be taken seriously unless they assert themselves and show that they have agency. It's not enough for you to sign agreements with the USA and for those agreements to be focused on extraction. There have been talk about some level of development going to be witnessed by the communities through where this railway passes. But it's not concrete, it's not intangible. These countries need to assert themselves. They need to understand that there's a scramble going on and they are the bride. So therefore, they have the leverage to dictate the terms and conditions when it comes to these agreements. These agreements should not be one-sided. There's no reason why it shouldn't be two-sided. It's supposed to be mutual. They benefit and you benefit.
The Donald Trump second term, will impact there. And now in the Horn of Africa, there's a wild card now, Somaliland. Strategic location is located in the center of the Horn of Africa, close to the entrance of the Bab al Mandeb Strait, critical waterway between Yemen and Djibouti, through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, to the Red Sea route, which accounts for passage of 1/3 of the global passage of goods and services. They've been a autonomous region governing themselves, but the world has recognized them as always part of Somalia. Ethiopia upped the antics and the game in the region, the geopolitical games, I would say, in the region recently by signing an agreement with them that recognizes them as an independent nation in exchange for access to the sea, which led to some form of geopolitical activities in that region. Egypt, which have had a gross with Ethiopia, considering the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam that can potentially impact the Nile River. And don't forget, Egypt's very own existence is based on the Nile's River, ability to get water from the Nile's River. So there's a lot going on in that region. Do you think Donald Trump, considering the strategic importance of this location of this country, Somaliland, do you think Donald Trump will recognize? Already, the Biden administration is easing away from his one Somalia policy and trying to engage with the region because their democratic points have increased over time. They've been making democratic strides in that country, in that Somaliland. So, do you think Trump will also recognize them, given the fact that Israel, which is a important U.S. ally in the Middle East, want to sign a defense agreement with them that enables them monitor the activities of the Houthis in the Red Sea?
So I think there are two possibilities here. The possibility that Trump will recognize them is hinged on the consequences of him recognizing them. Because, as we know, Somalia and Ethiopia are loggerheads because of Somaliland. Now, the agreement says that in exchange for recognition, Somaliland grants Ethiopia access to a naval coast where it's going to build a port. Somalia views Somaliland as an integral part of it, and it believes that by granting Ethiopia access to that port, that is by extension granting it a part of its sovereignty and territory. Now, the possibility of conflict from this is very high. So I think for the US, what will determine whether or not it recognizes Somaliland, and by the way, no country at the moment has recognized Somaliland, even Ethiopia hasn't yet. There's still a back and forth. In fact, an anonymous diplomat said that the agreement between Ethiopia and Somaliland was a memorandum of misunderstanding, meaning that both countries are on different pages. Somaliland badly wants recognition. Somalia badly wants access to the coast. Ethiopia badly wants access to the coast. So I believe that the consequence of recognizing Somaliland is going to determine whether or not the USA does it.
And don't also forget that it draws in other actors that are critical US partners in the region. For
Indeed.
example, Egypt, and again, Somalia, sorry, and Ethiopia. They are working together. In fact, so Ethiopia has a contingent of the African Union troops presently in Somalia, helping to fight Al Shabaab, to fight Al Shabaab insurgency. And then Somalia wants them out. Somalia wants the Ethiopians out. But here is the trick: the Ethiopian troops are there to protect their eastern provinces, to protect regrouping of Al Shabaab insurgents from from their eastern borders. That is the main reason why they agreed to join the African Union contingent in the first place. And the defense deal between the current defense deal between Egypt and Somalia, which was viewed as some analysts to counter the rise of Ethiopia in the Horn of Africa, is something that won't give, because the Ethiopians will not just agree to remove their troops over there. And then if the Somalians, even if the Egyptians go into Somalia, it is to protect the route that accesses the Red Sea. They will not pay attention to the other border areas. So this is another reason why, another cause for conflict, and something to and things to consider in the when you are talking about security and the geopolitics of the region. So can you give insight to how this do you think this will play out in the coming year?
So I believe that for these countries, Somaliland, Somalia, Ethiopia, and
Egypt.
even Egypt, what is important here is for a compromise to be made. As you've mentioned, the Al Shabaab insurgency is a potential terrorist threat there. So these countries need to understand that they are at the brink. They cannot afford another round of conflict. They are conflict prone. As you know, Ethiopia and Somalia have fought the Ogaden War that happened in the 1970s and 80s. So they are conflict prone, and at the moment they're battling an insurgency. So it's very important that a compromise is struck. So I believe that at the moment, Kenya, Djibouti, and even Eritrea have made offers to Ethiopia for a port since it's landlocked. But Ethiopia is insistent that it wants its own port, does not want a connecting port between it and another country. But that compromise has to be struck, because if it is not struck, Somalia is ready to go to war over ceding any territory to Ethiopia.
I doubt the ability of Somalia to even wage a war, considering that even in its capital, the Al Shabaab are able to even strike government targets and government buildings. I think from my own perspective, I think we are looking, even Egypt too. We are looking at what Egypt will do, but even Egypt too does not have the appetite for war now, considering what's going on between Israel and Palestine. And yes, it's good. Like, a compromise will have to be struck, and then we'll also be looking at what Donald Trump's the countries Donald Trump will engage, and also I think countries that in this region, the Red Sea, that have signed the Abraham Accords, recognizing Israel, will also get attention. Indeed, from Trump. So yeah, so that is that. Let me ask you before we leave. Like, how do you think African countries like can benefit themselves? Like, what do you think African countries should do, especially given the fact that there's this second, what we call it, second scramble for Africa, going on, and which is with the China-US rivalry is likely to intensify in the coming year.
Okay, so I think that African countries need to understand that there is a belief that is emanating at the moment that Africa has come of age, and a foreign policy that is focused on lecturing and moralizing will get you nowhere when it comes to relating African countries. There is a belief that that kind of foreign policy is counterproductive, given what France and the West have experienced in the Sahel. So, given this belief, it is now imperative for African countries to assert their agency. Like I earlier mentioned, the Vice President-elect J.D. Vance critiqued U.S. foreign policy for being focused on lecturing and moralizing, and then commended China for having an infrastructure-led approach. So, given this potential shift, African countries need to leverage on it to assert their agency. African countries need to understand that they can relate with various international partners to their own benefits, and that relating with a country does not translate to endorsing its ideological position. And this is how African countries can make the best out of this jostling for influence within it.
I'm going to talk about France because you mentioned the fact that they have been kicked out in the Sahel, and then recently we saw that it's signing deals with mineral resources deal with Nigeria. Recently, the Chadians kicked the French out. The Senegalese too are on the verge of doing so. And then, like, we've seen them losing their traditional partners to Russia and other to Russia. So, like, this alignment in the Sahel, like, how do you see it going forward? Do you think more countries will come out against France in the future, or do you think the French pivot to coastal West Africa? What do you see any strategy in that?
Well, I believe there's a strategy, and I also believe that Francophone Africa will continue to double down on this path of kicking France away because of the decades of injustice and imperialism. Now, this geopolitical bromance between Nigeria and France, in a period whereby our Francophone neighbors are bidding them au revoir, I believe it's a foreign policy disaster class. And I say this because aligning with their adversary undermines our credibility in their eyes and affects our ability to mend frosty relations that have emanated from the division of ECOWAS. Opposition to France has played a key role in the disintegration of ECOWAS as a body. Now, for France, the motive is clear. Having been kicked out of the Sahel, they are doubling down on their relationship with Nigeria and with coastal Africa to make sure that their influence is not totally eroded. But for Nigeria, I don't see any motive, neither do I see any outcome.
And again, it helps them because the coastal countries to keep the shipping lanes, especially in the Atlantic Ocean, moving, and then also gives them an ability to monitor the activities of Wagner, especially within the mines, all those mining sites in the Sahel area.
I have to make a comment on this because critical to what has happened between France and its colonies is the extraction of mineral resources. And now Nigeria has gone on to sign an agreement with France that borders on mineral resources. So this is an outcry to the Nigerian authorities. They need to make sure that their eyes are open when dealing with France in regards to mineral resources. It's not enough to just sign an agreement. Given the experience of our Francophone neighbors with France when it comes to mineral resources, we need to be careful. We need to make sure that we're not selling ourselves short. Because Niger had repeatedly complained that when it came to the extraction of uranium, the country did benefit from it. France had a permanent fixed percentage when it came to supply. They also had a permanent fixed percentage when it came to price. This is despite whatever goes on in the international market. Nigeria is too big of a country for this kind of shenanigan to be repeated.
And then for me too, I'm also like, for me too, like, it's also a way of like saying, like, African countries need to also move up the value chain. African countries cannot just be seen as extraction points. They need to move up the value chain to design, to manufacturing, and then to packaging. Like, it's the political will from individual African countries to do this. It's something that can be done, but there needs to be domestic political will.
And Nigeria has shown promise in this because I recall that under President Buhari, the then Minister of Mines and Steel rejected a partnership with Tesla. And the reason why that partnership was rejected because Tesla, owned by Elon Musk, wanted to extract lithium for the production of batteries. But this production wasn't going to be done in Nigeria. And the then minister emphasized that if you're going to extract lithium for the production of electronic vehicle batteries, a part of that value addition has to be done in our soil. And I commend him for that stance. And I encourage the present minister and the present government to take a cue from that and make sure that whatever is happening as regards to extraction, value addition is key in our soil.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. And before I go, I just want to add something to all that. We also need to have, in government, African government, they need to have people who understand, geopolitics and international relations, per se, like, in terms of, analyzing the motives of countries, like especially when they want to engage with these African countries, or to understand their motives so they can probably advise government. Let me give you an example. Following the invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022, if you notice, Norway started increasing its diplomatic presence in Nigeria. So do you have any
It's energy related.
energy? It's energy related because they are they were the ones that took over from Russia in terms of energy supply to Europe following sanctions. And so when talks began that, oh, we need alternative form of energies for diversify energy supply, Europe needs to diversify energy supply. One country came to mind that has a very, very untapped large gas, largely untapped gas, which is Nigeria, as I say. So they noticed they came to Nigeria obviously to take advantage and so take part in the cherry pie, or what did they call it?
Yeah.
So countries need to, especially African countries, they need to be able to understand when countries start engaging them. They need to understand the motives. So what are the geopolitical imperatives of these countries? What they are proposing, how does it affect them? So that's how we will know the worth of the value. And then also by increasing our value by increasing our own level at this, from extraction level at the value chain, to play a very, very big role to do that. Thank you very much for your insights on this episode. Please do tell your fans to like, subscribe, follow.
I don't know if I have any fans, but for anybody who is following and watching, please make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe for Geopolitics to Abno.
Thank you.